And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. The podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. Without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Darrin Drader, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Darrin Drader. I'm author. I am also a game designer with over 2 decades experience in the field. I have written for Wizards of the Coast. I've written for Paizo, Mongoose, Bastion Press, etc., etc. Fainting Goat is important since that's what brought me here. And for myself, I've also got a small publishing company.
And what is the name of your publishing company?
Darrin Drader Designs. Or
very creative. Nobody can ever get that wrong. It's your name.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes it very, very effective. I appreciate that. All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we first found them. So as he mentioned, Fainting Go Games with Mike Lafferty, he's been starting to send a lot of game designers our way, just because we're trying to diversify the kind of interviews we do, and so it's not the same old all the time. And I only know so many authors, people, so it's gotta broaden the horizons. And this is speaking of Fainting Go Games. This is the producer of the Blaster Bolts eZine, an electronic magazine, if you will. But before we get started on talking about that product that brought you here, this is the Blaster Blades podcast, so we can't let you escape without the religion question: Stargate, Babylon 5, or Battlestar Galactica?
Well, I have to say that I think that Babylon 5 is probably the best science fiction TV show ever to air. So that being the case, I have to say Babylon 5. However, I am also a huge fan of both versions of Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, not as much as Stargate?
I watched it. I thought it was okay. It's not my favorite, but I like it.
Okay. I learned the hard way with my son, where we started watching some of those older shows just because, why not? And I've got the box sets together. And I'm like, I watched this on TV. It's going to be good, even though it said some of it was mature. And I watched the very first episode, season 1, Stargate SG-1, full frontal nudity. I'm like, oh. And I was talking to my mom. I'm like, I don't remember this on the TV. She's like, that's because they edited this out on the TV version. Oops. All right. And because we're polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades, the Sword of Truth series, Conan, or the Sword of Shannara?
Conan.
Oh, outstanding. So you weren't a fan of the Terrys?
Well, Sword of Truth, I started reading it, and it just didn't click with the style of fantasy that I like. Sword of Shannara, I don't have anything against. I actually haven't read it. I've heard very good things. I've heard very good things about it. I'd very much like to read it at some point when I get the chance. It sounds really cool and really interesting, and I like the fact that they used, North America as or kind of a post-apocalyptic fantasy North America as their setting. But I've been a Conan fan for life.
I liked all of them, so I don't know that I guess I would be like the triad or whatever, the triumvirate. I don't know, because I liked all three, the books and the shows. I know it's sacrilege to say you like a TV show based on a book, but I can accept their different properties. The Sword of Shannara series, when you watch the TV version, which ended tragically short, thank you, Fox, where all good shows go to die. That's when I first realized it was set in a post-apoc modern world, because they had the silhouette of like a aircraft carrier sort of on its side and nature had overtaken it. Because when I read it the first time, I didn't remember that. I had to go back and reread it to realize that was the case, which I thought was kind of cool. All right, and so now we're going to introduce the episode. We'll be doing a brief interview where we dive into the world of short fiction. Today we have the Blaster Bolts eZine on deck, specifically episode 12, where Darrin's story resides. The Blaster Bolts is a new zine that features material from White Star, White Box, science fiction role-playing, and short fiction, which is paired together. The short fiction that we know and love with never-before-seen game content, so it's a win-win for everybody. And if you only want the game content, the price is still right. And if you only want the short story, again, the price is still right. So, all right, Darrin, what is your story in this issue called?
It is called Edge of Collapse.
That is an interesting name. Did you Did you come up with the name first or after you wrote the story?
I came up with it after, I think.
Okay. And does this story exist? Well, before we talk about whether it exists in other words, can you give us a synopsis of it without spoilers?
Without spoilers. Basically, a guy and his crew, that's that ship that you just put up, that is the eZine, that is their ship. They are on an archaeological expedition. They go to a planet that looks promising to them, and all sorts of interesting things happen. Basically, they run into a civilization that they believe is very primitive, and upon further investigation, it becomes more interesting to that. And there's also broader implications from the story in the rest of the setting, but to touch on those, I would have to be very spoilery.
Okay. So what was the inspiration for the short story?
So, basically, Mike asked me if I wanted to write a story for Blaster Bolts, and then we ended up deciding that the entire issue, issue 12, I believe, is going to be devoted entirely to the setting of Reign of Discordia. So when he asked me to write some fiction for it, I, thought back to the novel that I released about a year ago. It actually has the same same cover, although for some reason he did a 180 on the on the image itself. But anyway, I decided that it was a good idea to do a prequel to the novel in the form of the story.
Okay. That's good. So I guess that means this exists in a different, in a larger universe.
Oh yeah.
So could you give us the Reader's Digest version of that universe for people that aren't aware?
Okay, so Reign of Discordia basically asks the question, what happens if there was an evil empire and then it fell and there's nobody there to pick up the pieces? And of course, the answer is complete chaos. So, we've got our alien species that were, kind of the alpha citizens of this previous empire, and they're still pretty prominent. But then we also have a number of other species that were subjugated when their planets were invaded and things like that, and they're also going to be present. But like I said, Reign of Discordia is really about the chaos that happens when order falls away.
Okay.
So there's quite a few. There's a lot of small wars. There's piracy. There's crime bosses trying to take over, and pretty much if you can imagine it, it's happening somewhere in the setting.
Okay. So we talked before the show, and you mentioned that this was in the space opera genre. So is the rest of the universe that this story takes place as well?
Yeah, it is. I kind of, I drew from a lot of different places for inspiration for Reign of Discordia. Star Wars is obviously one. Battlestar Galactica to a small extent. Babylon 5. If you can imagine it, Firefly was one of them. So if you can imagine it, I tried to make it so that you can run any a mode in those styles of space opera somewhere in the setting. So,
Okay.
and the main kind of backdrop for where we're at right now with Reign of Discordia is there's a group called the Lamagos. They're basically blue-skinned humans. They're aliens, but they look like blue-skinned humans, and they have kind of a very totalitarian nature, and they're kind of warlike, and they were actually aligned with humans and these other species with the Empire. By the time we get to where we're at in the story now, of course, like I said, the story in Blaster Bolts is a prequel. But the Lamagos have pretty much become the villains because their home star is going to be going supernova, and they become super aggressive because of that. So I'm not sure if that's more information than what you're asking for, but
No, it's okay. So this is clear. Obviously, we mentioned this is space opera. So what is it about space opera as a genre that appeals to you?
Well, you know, that's kind of a tough question to answer, because when I was 4 years old, I went to Star Wars in the theater, and for me, that was just mind blowing. I'd seen episodes of Star Trek before that when my uncles would watch it, and I thought even at that age, I thought the effects were not that great, and I didn't really understand the stories and that type of thing. And then you get to so then 4 years old, I go and I watch Star Wars, and lightsabers and giant ships and Death Star and all stuff, and it kind of space opera is it's flashy, and it's a type of science fiction. It can make you think. It doesn't have to make you think. Sometimes it's just about straight on adventure, like the kind of adventure movies we used to watch back in the 1980s. That's kind of what space opera is to me. Um, and like I said, some space opera does make you think, Babylon 5, Star Trek, and that's great. And I'm a big fan of those too. But it kind of gives you the chance to imagine other worlds and other things that we just don't see here on Earth. Technology that doesn't exist, the ability to go places that we can't go right now. It's a little bit escapist, but it's also a little bit kind of imagining what our future can be like if we decide to work in that direction. So.
Okay. So you mentioned that this is the Reign of Discordia universe. I understand this will be aired obviously after the Kickstarter episode that they're going to listen to this past Friday, but this will be aired during the window. So if they don't remember that episode, can you give them the I guess the quick, fast, and dirty about this Kickstarter and what's going on with it, and we'll link it in the show notes as a reminder for people.
Quick, fast, and dirty. Well, we are kickstarting the second edition of Reign of Discordia. This is going to be compatible with White Star, the White Star role-playing game, and also compatible with 5e. Obviously, 5e is the excuse me, the 800-pound gorilla in the RPG market these days. And I've been a long-time D&D player, and designer. So for me, it's kind of a natural fit, making something that is compatible with that. It basically, what you get with blaster bolts, it's kind of a snapshot of one world at one particular point in time. What you get with the story is, again, another snapshot of a group of important characters at a previous point in time. And what you get with the second edition of the setting is, I'm giving you the universe. I'm giving you 50 detailed worlds. I'm giving you a space combat system. I'm giving you alien species that you can play. Quite a few of them, actually. Equipment, pretty much everything you need to run a space opera setting using these rule sets. And White Star already does use it already does have space opera. Obviously, that's kind of part of what it is. But there's going to be things there for White Star people as well, in addition to just the setting.
So the White Star setting, is that a D20 D6 only system, or is it closer to like Swords and Wizardry?
White Star is based. It's an OSR product, old school Renaissance, and White Star is actually based on the White Box, which is kind of a. I'm trying to remember what they actually called it, White Box Essentials or White Box. Anyway, they basically took a very early version of D&D and used the rules for that for their own product. And then White Star took those rules and made them science fiction.
Okay. So it's a lot closer to the original Dungeons and Dragons, and so less crazy dice that you need.
Right. Well, you do need the crazy dice. You need all the crazy dice still.
I'm still learning, so forgive my ignorance.
So basically, to summarize the difference here, 5e is a more modern system. It's a more complicated system. not as complicated as like third edition was, but 5e still has a fair amount of complexity, and a lot of people just really like going back to an earlier edition and playing that because it plays faster.
Okay.
You know, you literally you sit down and you can go through, you know, a full dungeon in one session, and a lot of people just kind of enjoy how excuse me, how streamlined it is. So for me, it's like, you know, we'll have the quick and easy to play version, and then we'll have the more detailed for the hordes and hordes of people who are playing 5e these days version.
Okay.
And I'm going to grab something to drink here. I'm sorry.
Oh, you are fine. You're fine. So while you're grabbing that drink, since you got your headset on, you can hear me. So we got one fun question for the road, because these short content interviews are intended to be, you know, rather quicker episodes. So if you could live in the universe that you created for Reign of Discordia, would you?
No way.
And why not? Without spoilers, obviously.
Because, like I said, Reign of Discordia, I think the name says it all. It is a very, let's just say there's plenty of adventure to be found, and that's why it makes a good setting for a role-playing game. But unless you're extremely lucky, extremely skilled, or you've just found a nice quiet place to settle down, your chance of seeing some pretty horrific things and getting killed are pretty high. So it's kind of like Star Wars in that respect. You know, do you really want to live in the Star Wars universe? I wouldn't. There's only one universe. Fair. There's really only one sci-fi universe I'd want to live in, and that's Star Trek.
Yeah, with my luck, if I lived in the Star Wars universe, I'd have been living on Alderaan, and you know what happened there. It looked like such a peaceful world. All right, so we promised you a quick interview. So as we wrap this up, Darrin, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, dear listener, links will be in the show notes.
Okay, so you will find me on the Kickstarter, as we've discussed already. You can find me on my Twitch channel. I run a 2D20 based Fallout game. So it's using the 2D20 system by Modiphius Entertainment, and the IP is Fallout. I think we've got 10 episodes down on that. We're actually doing Fallout Pacific Northwest on that one, which is where I live. So I've blown up my hometown and surrounding area. So we do that. We also do a Star Trek game, also using the Modiphius 2D20 rule set. And then I also do a podcast called RPG with R&D, where me and my co-hosts sit down with other professionals in the gaming industry, sometimes authors, sometimes publishers, and we talk. We talk. There isn't always a topic of conversation. We just see where the conversation goes. So there's that. You can find me on Facebook. I also have a Discord channel that you're welcome to join. And if you're interested in watching those game sessions I was talking about, I have a YouTube channel as well.
Outstanding. Because you mentioned Fallout, one of my favorite franchises. So do you have a favorite faction in the Northwest?
That's an interesting question, because they've never hit the Northwest.
I thought that's where you said you set your campaign.
I did. I said it here because they've never actually touched it, which gives me room to play.
But there would be some overlap, wouldn't there? I mean, some of the organizations, attempted to spread outward.
There is some. They have. I'll tell you who's not there, at least presently in the game, and that's the Brotherhood of Steel.
The NCR, actually, maybe?
The NCR is not there. The one group that they have actually run into are what's left of a section of Caesar's Legion. Okay.
All right. I always liked the flair of the NCR, but they were not the most effective despite their cool uniforms. And Caesar's Legion was pretty cool too. So, all right. You can find us, dear listener, on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can join us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/a Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, /groups/a Blasters and Blades podcast. You can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades, where you can also support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comments section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts Doc Cisca and Nick Garber duly overloaded in more literature than they could ever read. But, hey, we've got a dream, right? And a big library is always one of them. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and JR and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.